On Monday, NATO began nuclear exercises less than 900 kilometers away from Russian territory.
As Putin makes some changes to his military doctrine, NATO prepares to send nuclear warnings to Russia. This week, NATO will begin its annual nuclear exercise called Steadfast Noon, with more than 60 aircraft from 13 nations being part of the nuclear training flights. The exercise runs for 2 weeks and uses 8 military bases and 2,000 personnel. While the fighter jets will not be carrying any warheads, this exercise is good preparation for NATO. The exercise happens annually, but this time it coincides with recent talks by Putin about updating the nuclear doctrine. Could this be a mere coincidence, or is NATO sending a message to Russia? It seems recently, with all its nuclear talks, Russia has forgotten that NATO has more nukes than Russia does. If this is a message to Putin, how will Russia respond, given Putin's past threats, and what could the consequences of such chaos mean for the world? Let's answer all that and more. In this video, we're going to dive into how NATO is preparing for nuclear warfare, the updates to the Kremlin's nuclear doctrine, and what the effect of nuclear war would be on the world. As the war heats up, we're working hard to keep you guys posted on the daily challenges in the Russian-Ukrainian war. This is not always easy because of the algorithm and Putin's bots downvoting some of our videos. To keep us at the top of your suggestions, give this video a like and share it with your friends and family. Alright, let's get into today's video. This year's exercise is going to include a variety of aircraft, including nuclear-capable jets, bombers, fighter escorts, refueling aircraft, and planes capable of reconnaissance and electronic warfare. The host countries for this year are Belgium, the Netherlands, and the UK, and the exercises are also going over the airspace in Denmark and the North Sea. About 13 allies will send aircraft to take part in the drills this year, as the first allied F-35A fighter aircraft from the Netherlands will be ready for nuclear work. In these uncertain times, NATO is doing everything it can to ensure the safety of its nations, making sure that it deters aggression and maintains peace. NATO does not want to resort to nuclear warfare, but it is making sure that its alliance is prepared for the possibility. NATO General Secretary Mark Rutte told reporters in London, "In an uncertain world, it is vital that we test our defense and that we strengthen our defense, so that our adversaries know that NATO is ready and is able to respond to any threat." Most of the exercises will happen about 559 miles, about 900 kilometers, from Russia. But NATO has made sure that Moscow has been informed about the drills. Commenting on the exercise, Angus Lapsley, NATO Assistant Secretary General for Defense Policy and Planning, said that it aims to show off NATO's ability to counter any threat to its 32 member countries. Due to its focus on deterrence, its enemies may have thought that it was cowering, but exercises like this prove that things could get serious pretty quickly. As more nuclear powers have come on the scene, namely North Korea and Iran, NATO has found that it has to reassert its capabilities as a nuclear force. Moscow has also been on NATO's radar over the last 2 years because it has really been investing in its systems and updating its arsenal. What has made NATO more afraid is Putin's language around nuclear warfare, which NATO thinks is reckless and irresponsible. General Secretary Rutte has stated that Putin's talk about his nuclear arsenal is an attempt at getting the world to talk about him. But it will not work with NATO. Most of us probably did not know about this annual nuclear exercise because the nuclear threat has only become more real in the past 2 years. So let's talk about Operation Steadfast Noon. This operation is part of NATO's nuclear sharing policy, which involves some of its member countries in the planning and potential use of nuclear weapons. Not all the member states have nuclear power in NATO, so this policy represents how NATO will handle nuclear war as a collective. Only 3 NATO members, the United States, France, and the United Kingdom, are nuclear weapons states. Each of these countries' arsenals is part of the broader nuclear deterrence mission. The US's arsenal, which rivals most nuclear powers in the world, is the supreme guarantee of the alliance's security. The strategic nuclear forces of the United Kingdom and France also have a deterrent role of their own and contribute to the overall security of the alliance. Although not everyone has nukes, there are 7 allies who voluntarily participate in the nuclear mission by contributing dual-capacity aircraft. On a day-to-day basis, these aircraft can be used for conventional combat purposes, but they can also operationally deploy nuclear weapons in a conflict. Everybody in NATO contributes to the nuclear policy. Some of them have nukes, others fly them, others host them, and some of them make the decisions for their use. The first Steadfast Noon exercise was held in 2003, and there have been annual events that focus on nuclear deterrence and readiness. During the 2 weeks, countries in NATO that hold nuclear weapons, countries with bases, and countries with aircraft work together. This exercise involves about 14 nations, and in 2022, it was hosted by Belgium at Klein-Breugel Air Force Base. In most of the exercises, the training flights take place over Belgium, the UK, and the North Sea, with no nuclear weapons involved. Planning exercises are important for NATO because any dispensing of nukes will be a group decision. For instance, Belgium, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and Turkey hold B-61 nuclear bombs in Europe. In order for them to arm and load these warheads, they would need approval of the Nuclear Planning Group, or the NPG. Exercises like this prepare for what comes next after the approval. This operation puts all the personnel into action and prepares for the experience of a high-tempo conflict. It also plans every exact detail of how the weapons will be used and launched. According to Daniel Bunch, the chief of nuclear operations at Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers in Europe, the exercises are conducted with a fictional enemy, and many scenarios are played out to try to reflect current real-world events. NATO's acceleration of its exercises is in response to Putin's new nuclear doctrine. Prior to the war, Russia's nuclear doctrine was known as the Basic Principles of State Policy on Nuclear Deterrence, and it was signed in 2020. It stated that nuclear weapons were a means of deterrence, and noted that their use would only come in extreme measures. The document also declared that Russia would try, by all means, to reduce the nuclear threat and prevent aggravation. The threshold for dispensing nuclear weapons was set, and the document listed 5 times that nuclear warfare could happen. The first instance is if information was received about the launch of ballistic missiles targeting the territory of Russia or its allies. The next was if nuclear weapons or other weapons of mass destruction were used against Russia or its allies. The third instance was if an enemy attack with conventional weapons threatened Russia's existence, and the fourth was if there were any attacks on critically important Russian government or military facilities that could undermine the country's retaliatory nuclear strike capability. To add to this, the US and Russia, as the 2 biggest nuclear powers, have always agreed on nuclear deterrence. Despite this sensible document, internal voices in Russia have been arguing that the current policy is too weak and vague, and it has not deterred the West from assisting Ukraine because they believe that Moscow won't ever resort to nuclear weapons. Since the war began, Russia has become a lot more aggressive about its nuclear doctrine. As a warning to the West, President Vladimir Putin has said that any attack on Russia that is supported by a nuclear power will be considered a joint attack on his country. At the beginning of the war, Putin declared that if anyone tried to impede the war or threaten the Russian people and the country, Russia would respond immediately, and it would lead to consequences you have never seen in history. This year, the messaging has been a lot clearer. In a St. Petersburg session, Putin said, "Look what is written there. If somebody's actions threaten our sovereignty and territorial integrity, we consider it possible to use all means at our disposal." Now, there are talks that the threshold will be lowered even further to allow the use of nuclear weapons at the slightest sign of a threat to Russia. Foreign affairs expert Dmitry Trenin of the Institute of World Economy and International Relations, a state-funded Moscow think tank, suggests that the nuclear doctrine should be revised to make it possible for Russia to strike first with nuclear weapons if national interests are at stake. This is a grave violation of the principle that states that nuclear force should only be used in defense. He believes that in the 3rd year of this war, Russia's aim should be to prevent NATO's deeper engagement in the war. If a clause is added to the doctrine that will allow Russia to strike first, Trenin believes that NATO will take Russia more seriously. Russia is also racing to change the document because of reports that the West will be willing to deploy low-yield nuclear weapons against Russia. This will allow a contained nuclear attack that has the capacity to affect Russia only. Commenting on this, Putin said, "Nuclear devices of extremely low power are being developed, and we are aware of the ideas circulating in expert circles in the West that such strike assets could be used, and there is nothing particularly horrible about it. We are obliged to take notice of that, and we are taking notice." Another revision that has been announced by Putin is that an attack against his country by a non-nuclear power, with the help of a nuclear power, will be considered a joint attack on Russia. Putin has also left some of his statements vague on purpose to allow for a broad interpretation of a new doctrine. Putin's revised doctrine also allows Russia to use nuclear weapons in response to aggression against its ally, Belarus. It seems that both Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko and Putin have agreed on this and are planning to work together. NATO has also felt the need to step up on its exercise because In July, Russia conducted nuclear exercises involving mobile Yars nuclear rocket launchers, with plans to conduct more of these in the future. In June, Russia and Belarus also conducted joint exercises with tactical nuclear weapons, because Russia was trying to prepare for potential threats from Western powers. At this current stage, both sides are eyeing each other with suspicion. And this move by NATO to carry out its annual exercise has only escalated the situation further. The way the Kremlin sees it, NATO's annual nuclear exercise is only fueling tensions in light of the ongoing war in Ukraine. According to Dmitry Peskov, Kremlin spokesperson, the conditions do not allow for the level of escalation of pressure that NATO is applying. We've been throwing the word nuclear deterrence around a lot, but now we are going to explain what it means and how it impacts the ongoing conflict. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has made it clear that nuclear deterrence is the cornerstone of the Allied security alliance. The aim of enforcing the concept of nuclear deterrence is to prevent war. Nations with nuclear arsenals have stood by this principle and explained that maintaining nuclear power is what deters other countries from using theirs. The only time that these nations agree that they will use nuclear force is when they are acting in self-defense and responding to an armed attack against their nation's interests. Having nuclear power has been used as a bargaining tool, and the more nuclear power a state has, the better its position. There have been many debates about the morality and legality of having nuclear power. Many have felt that most nations hide behind the idea of deterrence to continue to build their arsenals. However, there must be some good to this theory, because it has prevented war up to this point. Russia has claimed that it believes in this principle, but the recent changes to its nuclear policy revealed that that might not be the truth. In the past couple of months, the relaxation of its nuclear doctrine has revealed that Russia is not afraid to go fully in with nukes. With the potential of a 1 versus 32 in the future, let's compare NATO's arsenal to Russia's to see how it would be fair. Putin is as confident as he is in nuclear warfare because Russia has the biggest arsenal in the world. Russia is also in a unique position because it has a nuclear triad, and only the US, China, and India have one as well. This nuclear triad basically means that Russia can launch nuclear missiles from land, sea, and air. Russian Yars missiles are also one of a kind. This missile is a solid-fuel intercontinental ballistic missile with the capacity to carry up to 6 independent atomic warheads with a power of up to 300 kilotons each. The range of the RS-24 Yars is described as 6,835 miles, making it possible for it to target anywhere in the world. It is estimated that Putin has a total of 5,977, with 1,500 of those warheads being retired but intact. 2,889 in reserve and 1,588 are deployed strategic warheads. Russia's land-based missiles can deploy about 812 nukes, its submarine-launched missiles can deploy 576, and around 200 can be deployed by heavy bomber bases. According to the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, Russia has about 400 nuclear-armed intercontinental ballistic missiles and operates 10 nuclear-armed nuclear submarines, which would carry a maximum of 800 warheads. It also has about 60 to 70 nuclear bombers. With this arsenal, Russia could take out the world in one swipe. Any nation having that much power is a major cause for concern, and that is why NATO has stepped up its operations. What is even scarier about all this is the fact that the decision to use Russian nuclear weapons rests solely on Putin. In order to launch the nukes, Putin uses a briefcase. This nuclear briefcase is called Shcheget, and it was named after Mount Shcheget in the Caucasus Mountains. The briefcase is a communication tool that links the president to his rocket forces via the Kazbek electronic command and control network. If Russia faces a nuclear attack, the president sends a direct launch order to General Staff Command and Reserve Command units, which holds the nuclear codes. The order then goes to the Strategic Rock units, which launches the attack. NATO has an estimated 100 nuclear warheads in Europe. These warheads are stored in 5 NATO non-nuclear weapon states: Belgium, Italy, Germany, the Netherlands, and Turkey. These nukes are kept in 6 air bases, and these 5 states have what is known as dual-capable aircraft that can carry U.S. nuclear warheads. Under NATO and USAF command, Air Force pilots from these 5 countries would take part in operational sorties to practice how to attack targets in Russia with missiles. The nuclear weapons stored in Europe are the B-61 intermediate and low-yield tactical thermonuclear two-stage radiation implosion warheads. These B-61 bombs can be delivered as free falls or a retarded airburst. This type of explosive device has a delayed timer on it and is used because it detonates above ground. These bombs are normally attached to a parachute that quickly slows the bomb's descent and controls its trajectory. The bomb is quite heavy, at approximately 705 pounds, about 320 kilograms, making it a cause of a decent explosion. These bombers are NATO's specific nuclear asset, but like we said earlier, its member states also have nuclear power, which can be used against Russia. The combined power of the US, UK, and France's 5,889 warheads has the ability to field Russia's. This graph breaks down the nuclear triad and shows which power between NATO and Russia has the lead. In terms of intercontinental ballistic missiles, Russia has 1,185 and NATO has 800. NATO has more nuclear submarine-launched ballistic missiles with 2,385 to Russia's 800. In terms of warheads that are intended to be delivered by aircraft, NATO has 900 and Russia has 580. NATO has more non-strategic nuclear warheads with 1,912 compared with 230 from Russia. Countries like the US, UK, and France protect other NATO allies under what are known as nuclear umbrellas. These guarantee that a nuclear weapons state will defend a non-nuclear allied state if attacked by a nuclear power. In the case of a nuclear attack on a non-nuclear armed state, a nuclear armed state will cooperate to help fight for them. With the potential for nuclear war on the horizon, we have to have a sobering conversation about what nuclear warfare will actually look like. If a nuclear war were to break out, more than half of the United States population would be killed. The most likely scenario is that the major cities will be targeted to take out military facilities and affect post-war recovery. Each time a nuclear weapon hits, it'll create a fireball about as hot as the core of the sun, followed by a radioactive mushroom cloud. These types of intense explosions completely vaporize people nearby and cause fires and blindness to people further away. The intense heat can cause severe burns on exposed flesh as far as 20 miles away from a large thermonuclear explosion. The blast wave, intense heat, radiation, and radioactive fallout of nuclear blowups will cause massive death and destruction and trigger large-scale displacement. The first few days after a nuclear attack will look like something out of an Armageddon-style movie. Then, after that, nations will have to pick up the pieces. The long-term effects on human health and well-being, as well as the damage to the environment and infrastructure, will be immeasurable. Such nuclear attacks will also affect food security. The effects of the radiation will lead to the cooling of the atmosphere and shorter growing seasons for food. This will lead to wide-scale drought. The damage that will be left will take several decades to reverse, and the reconstruction of the world will happen slowly. The long-lasting effect of exposure to ionizing radiation on health and the environment is still being studied, with reports that it will affect women and children more. The perfect case study of how bad nuclear war could get was in Japan. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki changed the course of history, and Japan still suffers from the effects of the bombing to this day. On August 6th of 1945, an American B-29 bomber dropped the world's first deployed atomic bomb over the Japanese city of Hiroshima. The bomb, known as the Little Boy, was dropped by a parachute at 8:15 in the morning, and it exploded 2,000 feet above the city. The first bomb did not lead to the Japanese surrender. So, 3 days later, a second B-29 jet dropped another A-bomb on Nagasaki. This one was called the Fat Man, and it was dropped at 11:02 that morning. An estimated 70,000 people died in Hiroshima, and 40,000 died in Nagasaki, and many succumbed to burns, injuries, and radiation poisoning. About 2/3 of injured Hiroshima survivors showed evidence of such flash burns caused by the intense heat. The long-term health effects of the radiation were also a cause for concern. After the bombing, reports of leukemia in survivors were recorded. Between 2 years and 8 years after the exposure, survivors also began to report other types of cancers, such as thyroid, lung, and breast cancer. Other common health effects include cataracts, keloids, and abnormal protruding scar tissue that formed as burned skin healed. Realizing that these are the side effects of a potential nuclear war, both NATO and Russia need to think twice before they decide to hastily rush into including nukes in the mix. The nuclear war anticipated now will be on a much larger scale, meaning we should triple the potential damage it will cause. It must also be noted that Russia could align with Iran and North Korea, which are both growing nuclear powers in the world. This means that more NATO countries could be hit, and the nuclear war could be catastrophic. Luckily, NATO understands that nuclear warfare is not an option, so it has also prepared other responses to the war. Operation Steadfast Defender 2024 is a maritime, air, and combat experiment aimed at getting NATO's army to practice how it responds to the threat of war. The drills took place between January 22nd and May 31st, with around 90,000 troops from NATO allied nations, and about 50 ships, like destroyers and massive aircraft carriers, were used. On the aerial front, about 80 fighter jets, drones, and helicopters also participated in the experiment. 1,100 combat vehicles, which included 533 infantry fighting vehicles and over 130 tanks, were also part of this exercise. The aim of this exercise was to help NATO figure out how they would connect together to respond to any kind of attack. This was NATO's biggest exercise in decades, and it was in response to accelerated aggression in Europe. U.S. Army General Chris Cavoli said the drills would first rehearse NATO's regional plan, which the alliance drew up in response to a Russian attack. The exercises were carried out in several key European countries, including Finland, Estonia, Germany, Greece, Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania, Norway, Poland, Romania, Slovakia, Sweden, and the United Kingdom. During the initial phase, the focus was on maritime reinforcement across the Atlantic and in the Arctic. The second phase shifted to using deployed reinforcements from the Arctic to the eastern flank. The exercise was broad and covered anything from land, air, sea, cyber, and space operations. These types of large-scale exercises are planned years ahead of time and use made-up situations to help the alliance prepare its collective defense. As NATO goes through its drills, it's able to perfect its plans and plan everything down to the minute. The second part of the Steadfast Defender exercise has a special focus on the deployment of NATO's Quick Reaction Force to Poland on the alliance's eastern flank. This is because of the added pressure that Belarus and its ally Russia have been seeing around the Polish border. NATO has also practiced its response at other major locations in the Baltic states, as they are at risk of Russian attacks as well. At this stage in the war, operations like Steadfast Defender are important because they provide valuable insights and enhance NATO's defense plans. These types of efforts also aim to demonstrate NATO's commitment to collective defense and send a message to Russia that it will not hesitate to protect its allies. The 2024 version of this exercise is symbolic because it is showcasing an unseen level of unity against a common enemy. In a statement, NATO declared, "Steadfast Defender 2024 will demonstrate NATO's ability to rapidly deploy forces from North America and other parts of the alliance to reinforce the defense of Europe." Responses like these are more favorable than operations like Steadfast Noon because such a response by NATO will have less of an impact on the world than a nuclear war. If Russia escalates the situation and tries to attack any of NATO's members, the first response will not be nukes. Exercises like Operation Steadfast Defender show that NATO is committed to ensuring that it protects the sovereignty of its states in the least detrimental way. Russia, on the other hand, has been backed into a corner, and the fear is that it may choose nukes as retaliation. Now, recently, we crossed 1 million subscribers. Ever since then, we've been flooded with emails asking us questions and advice about growing a channel here on YouTube. Even though we try our best to reply to every single email, sometimes these take up too much time or they ask the same question we've answered 1,000 times before. That's why we've decided to put all of our YouTube advice into one email bootcamp for completely free. So, if you're someone who's interested in starting your own YouTube channel, you can get your email bootcamp by clicking on the link in the description or by scanning the QR code that's on the screen. Up until this point, NATO has been trying its hardest to stay neutral and avoid aggression with Russia. But things have escalated to this point, and NATO has been forced to step in. Its military exercises are part of its annual program, but the running of the program around the same time that Russia has been talking about nuclear warfare, well, it's far from a coincidence. In the spirit of deterrence, NATO is looking to remind Russia that nuclear war will not end well for Russia. On the other hand, if Putin continues to aggravate, NATO might be left with no choice.